First of all, thank you very much, Alex, for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you for coming.
This is a talk that has a little bit to do with some experimentation. And if you're not as enamored with XenServer as I am, don't take it too seriously, because really it's not specifically even about XenServer necessarily.
Does anyone use XenServer?
Yes.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah. Nice to see some hands of XenServer users.
I don't either, yeah.
But the point here is that basically Citrix is pushing in the direction that essentially eventually all of their products are going to be able to be integrated. And in this particular case, really, XenServer just works as an example of what can be done. In particular, looking into where we can take products and integrate them with Octoblu in terms of being able to automate and integrate things. Just real quick, Tobias Kreidel here with Northern Arizona University for over 20 years. I lead a team that does all kinds of things with the desktop environment, with XenServer, XenApp, with XenDesktop, and to some degree also with NetScaler. And the motivation here is everybody has to administer all kinds of things. How can we avoid the necessity of being woken up unnecessarily at 3 o'clock in the morning when it is totally possible in this day and age to automate certain processes? So this is basically what this talk is all about. Okay, well, as I just said, integration of, in this particular case, of XenServer with Octoblu. Why? Well, because obviously I want to provide an automatic means to be able to interactively control one or more XenServer environments. Not only do I want to have the ability to issue individual commands, but also define procedures that can be established by creating prepackaged batch files that then have the versatility of being fed enough parameters such that certain predefined functions then can be executed. And we'll get into, of course, the importance of why I want to do that a little bit later on as well. In addition to this, I'm going to talk a little bit about an ongoing project which is not quite to the point of total functionality yet, but has to do with, again, the interest of keeping systems up and going, and in particular, in this particular case, of monitoring the hardware using basic SNMP in order to make intelligent decisions about the status of the physical hardware. Now, why is that important? Well, we all know that Citrix has such things as workload balancing, high availability, and all that, which is wonderful and very, very nice to be able to utilize in an environment. But part of the problem is that high availability doesn't mean uninterrupted availability. And where things like this become very, very important is, for example, if a server fails, sure, the VMs will fail over, they will restart on another host within my XenServer pool, but the problem is that I still have downtime. You know, even if it might only take a few minutes for things to get going again, I still have an interruption. And in particular, as discussed a little bit yesterday, with things like vGPUs, for example, if I've got a number of users who are running, vGPUs, talking to my NVIDIA grid in the background, if it takes them 15 minutes just to load in the file that they're working on, and there's a disruption here, and I do not have the ability to XenMotion this to another instance, I've lost a huge amount of productivity. And so instead of being reactive, the goal and the hope here is to deal with things in a proactive means. the input really can come from anywhere in the outside world, right? And in particular, the predictability and the ability to react in a consistent manner is really what the goal is here. Okay, so the implementation. There are a number of ways to go about this, of course. Eric Haberstein has approached this, for example, using PowerShell scripts. James Baldwin has approached this by providing direct calls to APIs. In my particular case, my thought is, I'm too lazy to implement this kind of stuff, and I don't have the time and probably not the intelligence to do a lot of it. So my recourse is to make use of anything and everything that already exists. So in this particular case, my thought was, you know what? A lot of XenServer administrators already have written a lot of batch scripts, to do things through the bash shell. And a lot of them are very familiar with the XE CLI environment. So let's just extend this to make this possible. So in essence, all the integrations into Octoblu have to do with making use of really the three basic functions: the connector shell, the function, and the compose tool. Now, of course, by leveraging that, you have to have obviously some means of establishing the communication link between your Octoblu session and your XenServers. So after playing around with a number of different things, well, first of all, Slack, of course, integrates very, very well into this environment. This already was very well established, so why not leverage that to deal with the execution part of it. Within the very well-known terminal tool, PuTTY, there's an add-on called P-Link, which basically is effectively the means to take a shell command, populate it, and push it on to another machine. In conjunction with that, of course, obviously I really do not want to pass clear text passwords around. And so by leveraging the ability to create secure SSH files that allow for the seamless communication back and forth, using PuTTYgen, I can create PPK files that basically, just go into the secure shell area on the destination, and voila, I have an instant secure communication means. For the SNMP monitoring, the really interesting conversation I had with Chris Matthew about this is he said, you know what, Octoblu is not the most efficient mechanism in the world for running things, so as much as possible, do your processing externally, and then only when necessary, provide that information to your Octoblu flow, so that it then can react to the information only when it actually needs something. There are a number of SNMP tools out there. For example, in our particular case, we run a lot of Dell servers, which use various DRAC internal control mechanisms. These can be queried both internally and externally. And so, for example, there's a utility called DRAC ADM that you can run from the command line, directly talking to your environment. The problem is that the output coming out of that is absolutely hideous. And of course, internally, obviously, you can remote in to your DRAC module and get all kinds of interesting information, but that's a GUI, and being able to pull information out of that doesn't work either particularly well. So I eventually decided that the best way to do this is to work from externally, use open source tools called SNMP get and SNMP walk in order to do these queries. The other beauty of that is I can have one centralized server and make these queries to multiple machines and accumulate all the data then within one machine, do the various analyses as to what the status of things are, and then, again, like I said, provide that information when necessary back to the Octoblu environment. So what I used basically was SNMP walk and also DRAC ADM in order to first query to find out what all was available, because in many cases there are hundreds, if not actually even thousands in some cases, of various parameters that you can pull out of SNMP, right? And I'll show you in a second what the format looks like. It's absolutely hideous, but you have to be able to equate what one thing does with what, you know, this particular format looks like. The gathering of this information, as I mentioned here, goes on an NFS commonly mounted mount point among all the Xen servers involved. Obviously, you want to make sure that you can't just feed things that are either garbage or are insecure in the sense of being able to access areas where you really should not be treading when you make these communications. And then for the Slack part of it, again, also security is really important. You don't want anybody, you know, within your Slack environment to start arbitrarily sending commands, and you also want the results and the responses of those commands to go into a channel which is secure and only, for example, you want your administrators to be able to access. All right, and finally, yeah. Anyone who does any kind of XenServer administration or querying of these things should always obviously operate as much as possible within private networks.
Quite interesting next door.
Huh?
Things are getting quite interesting next door.
We'll join them later.
Why, you have Bikram yoga like before?
I'm sitting on the floor.
Here is just a
Tobias.
quick.
Quick question.
Oh yes, of course.
Just my curiosity, did you have, is that the paid version of Slack, or could you do that through the free version?
This is the free version.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah. All the availability of the tools are embedded within the free version. Basically, all I did was create a Slack channel, and then I had to go in through Octoblu and create a so-called endobot that provides that kind of connectivity. Question? Okay, so here, this is just very quickly kind of what the outlook is. Octoblu, of course, can query itself for various types of things. There's an input-output mechanism available so that Slack can talk back and forth. For messaging, clearly, depending on the circumstances, you're going to have and want different kinds of levels of messaging. You're going to want, for example, for emergency situations to have perhaps a higher level of alerting, text messaging, for example. For lower levels of such things, probably email is completely sufficient. And again, you also would want to have presumably subsets of individuals defined so that for certain types of alerts, one particular group might want to receive this kind of information, whereas for a different level of issues, you might want to have a different subgroup. Then we have this hook, basically. In this particular case, I'm running P-Link on a Windows server. It can also run actually under Linux. Doesn't really matter, whatever you wish. And then here we have this connectivity that goes to my Linux server that I use to gather the SNMP statistics, and then this back and forth communication with the XenServer. Okay, here's an example of what some of the flows look like in Octoblu. Up here,
Put it in the bathroom.
We have the basic XE interface here, which can be triggered either through a Slack channel or manually just defining, a particular trigger. In this case, I have to put in a filter here so that the bot in this case does not loop back on itself. The information then goes to a compose tool where certain parameters are pulled out. Some of that information then flows into a connector shell where the execution takes place. The information from that flows into a function tool which does some data massaging, and then the information from this compose tool part of it flows directly across, part of it comes from here, and then when it has gathered all the information it needs, it can send out information as to what actually transpired, depending on how I define such things. The same holds true basically for a very similar flow. In this particular case, this is a batch function, and again, in this particular case, really, right now I just have it set up so that I can put in an individual command and test it out. So this is all kind of ongoing and at this level. Yes.
Would you mind sharing like one example of what you're using this for?
Oh, of course.
So basically, every time a XenServer has an error, it sends you SMS, so you get SMS all day, ding, ding, ding.
Only if you've configured it wrong.
A good example would be, for example, I don't have a XenServer available, or I don't have a shell to the XenServer available. I want to shut down a VM. I happen to have a Slack channel open. I can just take care of it there. Honestly, the individual command line thing is really kind of a precursor to what becomes more interesting, namely being able to do batch commands. And being able to do batch commands in turn becomes much more interesting in the goal of eventually providing the means to catch problems and deal with problems before they become problems, and have the system deal with issues on its own. So that's really what the ultimate goal in all of this is. So here's an example. For example, here's kind of what this plink command line looks like. Basically, you're connecting via SSH, as a particular user, and you're pulling in this this file which contains the keys that are common to the connection. And then you have to put an echo Y in front of it because of some really oddities in terms of how that works. Here's an example, for example, of what the one of the functions looks like. In this particular case, what I've chosen to do is just use capital XC followed by a pound sign as the delimiter. And then basically what it does is it pulls in this long string, from the server, and I parse it out eventually in my command here by basically splitting on the pound sign. And then I figure out where the host name came in, and then I have to do a little bit of massaging here, blah, 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 blah. Over here you can see what the Octoblu internal variables look like essentially. Here's the executable here that actually goes to my gateway. And here are the parameters that are of interest. I've got basically the XE command, I've got the host, or the XE functionality, the XE host that it goes to, and the command itself. And then what comes out in the function is essentially just the ability to take this information, split it out, and then you remember I had these two different flows merging together, coming in from the where the gathering of the information was. So I pulled in things like the host, what the command was, and then I capture the result code and the exit code, and if there's anything going to SCD error. So the basic command syntax is extremely simple. It's capital XE pound, or it could be XE space pound, doesn't matter. The host name of where the command is going, and then I can either provide the IP address of the target host or the host name, and then another pound, and then whatever XE command I want. So here's what it kind of looks like. So here's an example. So I have, for example, here on my, going through Slack, I've got XE, name of my host, this huge long command, which is basically, I want to live migrate one of my VMs that has this unique UUID. Here's, just to show what it looks like on my XenServer, that yeah, this is indeed the UUID. In this particular XenServer pool, I have two hosts. Right now, this particular machine called test-ubuntu 12-2 happens to be running on the server XS test2. Okay, what happens is when the command is executed, I get a result of those, of what it ran, going to my endobot. The endobot says on this particular host, I got an exit code of 0, which for all you Linux fans means everything's hunky-dory. Sorry?
And then XAPI crashes.
And it says, here's the command that was run. And as we can see here, the very same VM with this very same UID now has migrated successfully from XS Test 2 over to XS Test 1. So the really nice thing here is basically any command line that I can think of, any standard XE command, I can just issue. So again, the purpose of this, of course, it's nice to be able to run individual commands, but having the ability to collect things together in batch scripts gives you the power to link, of course, things together so that you can then do certain things under certain circumstances. Yes?
You run the command like from home, within having
Anywhere.
Slack desktop?
Oh, anywhere you want.
But you don't even need to be connected remotely anymore. If you
As long as you have, say, a Slack channel open, can be anywhere in the world. And
do you have a command like to list the UID so you will pick them up because you know them are
XE VM-list. Absolutely. I don't even have to run XenServer, for example. Or if I'm really wanted to, of course, I could SSH in and do whatever. Right? Yes.
One of the advantages is that your command line is actually pretty consistent from version to version. Sure, new things might be added, which is not the case with XenServer. Usually people will have to update. So here you can probably smoothly sail even with updates added to your XenServer from version to version.
Yes, absolutely. That's a very, very good and valid point. Also, not everybody is terribly comfortable with API calls. I mean,
Especially XenServer.
especially with XenServer, they're very complicated. And of course, geniuses, like James Baldwin, it's like, second nature to him. But for the average system administrator, as I mentioned earlier, typically they're going to be much more familiar with the XE CLI. Now, in a batch file situation, of course, obviously you want not only to be able to run this as a script. So basically, instead of XE, basically the syntax now becomes XE script. And then again, as before, the syntax is pick the name of a host or an IP address. Then we have as an additional parameter the script that needs to be run. And again, because this is all on a common NFS mount point, it's accessible from any of the XenServers that I choose to make available. And then potentially you're going to have multiple arguments because depending on what the script does, you're going to potentially want to, of course, feed additional information to it, right? So this is just basically a batch script. So here's an example. I'm running this particular script on this particular host. Here's the name of the command, which is basically vm-list.sh. That's the name of my batch file. And then here are the arguments that I'm passing to that batch file. Namely, I've got a name label so that I can identify on which VM this runs. And then here are some additional parameters that I want to do. Now, for security reasons, these batch commands are kept in a very, very specific subdirectory. Yes?
Do you do anything with the caseness of name labels? So one thing we find is that when I create a VM, if it's any kind of mixed case, you have to match case exactly because it's Linux underneath. So when we build all our VMs, we make sure we make everything uppercase. Then when we write our commands, we either make sure that they're uppercase or we convert everything to uppercase within the command logic. So do you do something like that with?
No, not really, because we have so many different people involved, honestly, that create VMs. The beauty there is that if you batch this stuff, you can, of course, do a VM list and potentially extract that name out of it. And then you don't really necessarily care what it is. If you know approximately what the name is, you can use op and grep and sed and all kinds of, little internal things within your batch script in order to pull that information out. Okay, so here again is an example of that flow. Here's a very, very basic batch file. Basically, it says, hey, here's the name of my, kind of just a descriptor of what the script is. I've got two arguments that I'm passing in, and here is the actual command that I'm running. So I'm basically running xe VM list and passing these two arguments. Here is what effectively then comes from issuing that command. You can see that it exited with a proper status code. Here's the output, which gets parsed. And you can see here I have the pulled out from these parameters the actual memory being utilized and the start time as specified. And then on my bot, I get a full report of it. Here's what was run, and I get exactly the same information. And again, the beauty is, depending on who needs or wants to get this information, you can push it off to anybody you want, right? Okay, so why is SNMP monitoring interesting? And this kind of is the follow-up on all this. Well, things break, right?
With XenServer all the time.
Constantly. And if you have a server room that looks like something like this, in particular, you're even more vulnerable. People are walking through and they snag their foot on a cable, and before you know it, the Ethernet cable gets
The
yanked
main power
out.
thing that's right there that you pull down.
Yeah, they even
Yes, exactly. What's really funny is when they constructed what was supposed to be a temporary building, when they first put it up, all the power control switches were on the outside of the building. I finally called facilities management and I said, you know what? One of our students is just going to come along and just pull that lever of the power, and the whole building is going to go up. Put a lock on it.
Yeah, we can put a lock on it.
As mentioned earlier on, high availability disaster recovery is not being proactive, it is reactive. You want to catch issues before they become problems. Practically everything within your server room environment already is SNMP aware, so why not leverage that? There are, literally hundreds, if not thousands of metrics you can pull out of servers. And so you have the ability to pick and choose exactly which ones are important to you. Again, the other beauty of Octoblu is, for example, if you have an internal monitoring system, say within your server room, that looks at things like the ambient temperature of the server room, whether the temperature within the server room is within tolerances, or the humidity, or someone has broken in, or whatever. All those additional metrics can all be combined, also with those associated with the internals of your hardware. Think also if you have a RAID device, for example, you can monitor your RAID devices and see, for example, if one of the RAID arrays has become non-optimal because one of the disks has failed, for example. Again, the real object here is to be able to handle cases automatically. If something breaks at 3 in the morning and is very simple, is at a state, for example, where, for example, the temperature of the inside of a server is rising because a fan has failed, before the whole system fails, if I can detect that, I can take all of my virtual machines, migrate them to a different server, shut down the machine cleanly, and then just send an email to the system administrator saying, hey, at 3:02 a.m., here was the set of circumstances that I detected. Here was the recourse. When you get in the morning, take a look. No need to wake anybody up at 3 in the morning for something that can be handled automatically. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to be able to contact subgroups of individuals depending on the level and the severity and the set of circumstances gives you that enormous set of flexibility. You can send information any way you want. Email, Slack, SMS, alarm. You could have it in somebody's bedroom, for example, if you tie into their home system, for example, through Octoblu and something like Nest or Hue or SmartThings or whatever. You could carrier pigeon, sure. Have it unlock the cage, and off goes the pigeon and delivers the message, right? I mean, it's really completely up to the imagination, how you do any or all of these things, right? Was there a question?
And how do you automate your carrier pigeons? That's
You train them very well.
You have multiple cages. Each one carries a particular message, and then depending on the circumstances,
There's a little cattle prod at the back.
yeah. Well, no. All you have to do is have a mechanism on each that unlocks the cage, and then there you go.
Get a receipt printer, so that way when it prints out, it just wraps around its leg already.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Around his neck.
So now we're gonna do carrier pigeons as a service?
Well, it's actually already
Yeah.
it's actually already been done. There's RFC
Pony
1149
Express,
IP over
I mean, whatever, right? Totally up to you. So why all of this? Well, as I mentioned earlier,
RFC 11.
we need in this day and age to work proactively. I mean, when things are down, yeah, sure, your Nagios monitors go off and say your system is died. It's too late at that point. If we have the means to catch issues before they actually become problems, we're all so much better off. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of circumstances are very standardized, and you pretty much know exactly what to do under those circumstances, right? So why not make that an automatic process? For example, evacuating VMs from a server, shutting down a server. And honestly, the other thing is, if I get a call at 3 in the morning, the first thing I'm going to go say, hello, who is this?
XenServer, it's me. I shot everything again.
And we have actually operators in our center who are on duty pretty much 24/7. But if I get a call at 3 in the morning, I'm not going to be totally awake. I'm not going to necessarily be in a state of mind where I can make the most intelligent decisions on what to do under those circumstances. And I'm certainly not going to be able to react nearly as quickly. The other thing that is a very important point is that, you know, we talked a lot yesterday about machine learning and artificial intelligence. Well, there are going to be certain sets of circumstances where the machine, and given all the information available, is not really going to know what to do. And under those circumstances, it is very important that the ultimate decision-making process be given to human beings. You know, until maybe at some point in the future, you can better define that. You don't want unexpected things to happen. So don't necessarily let the machinery make all the decision for you.
Is that what AI is for?
Eventually, yes, absolutely. But at this point in time, until you know better what the circumstances are, don't forget that a human being might actually be your best recourse. And I'll address that in just a moment, actually, about the whole AI thing. Again, you can set different priority levels. You can, I've really gone over all of this, essentially. Oh, and the other thing, of course, is if you log your data to multiple servers, they can all be doing the same things, basically. So you can have a certain degree of redundancy there as well, right? So here's an example of an SNMP command, which is like really, really ugly because you've got these incredibly long strings of things, right? But once you figure out what those are, for example, as you can see here in my prologue script, here's a set, for example, of all of these bizarre values which I have then associated with a human readable thing of what it actually does and is, right? Because that's what I want to see as a human being ultimately. I don't want to see this long string of numbers that I can't really equate to. So once you've established all these, you can then assign certain levels of severity, and then as a consequence, depending on the level of severity, you can then figure out, well, what are the actions? So here, very basically, is what I'm kind of doing right now. So when something happens, I create what I call a case file, and right now I've got these 6 parameters in there. I have, as you saw before, depending on what the issue was, I identify the friendly name of what the issue is, give it a timestamp. In many cases, there's going to be either a numeric or an alphabetic metric, a number, true, false, something like that. In some cases, again, a limit associated with it, what host it was discovered on, what the IP of the host was, and then right now I have levels assigned from 0 to 100 depending on the severity of the circumstance. There's one more parameter that I've actually added in the meantime, which I call action. And action is essentially, depending on the circumstances, an associated batch script specific to that particular thing. Here you can kind of see the logic. Obviously, if it keeps pulling things and he keeps finding the same problem over and over and over again, obviously you want to be able to catch that, make sure that you don't get into a loop, so that you keep processing things over and over and over again. So it will create a flag indicating that, oh, okay, I've seen this issue, and I'm going to do something about it. So you don't have to keep telling me over and over again what's going on. Yeah, and I should mention one thing, that each one of these things has the following syntax. It is the host name followed by hyphen, and then an identifier type, and then a particular which would be associated with this issue, and then just followed by the word case. That way, again, if something happens on a particular machine, again, it is unique to that. Okay, the future. So, add more monitoring functions. Obviously, you can selectively pick, which ones of the particular SNMP possibilities you want to deal with. Totally customizable. gather logs and metrics and analyze for what is normal. So this goes back to what you said earlier, Derek. If you're gathering a huge amount of information, learn from it, you know? So for example, one thought is, why not send this data into Splunk? You know, leverage some of its machine learning modules to identify, for example, what is a normal operating temperature, or what is a normal fan speed, and have it do the analysis, which it can do on its own, and say, oh, okay, I know now what constitutes an anomalous value or what works as an outlier, and then you can tweak the parameters, again, to better make, ultimately, decisions on what to do and when to potentially then take action. The other aspect of this is, you know, as I mentioned, workload balancing, even though it's an incorporated feature, it's pretty darn limited. You know, you can either maximize your density or you can maximize your performance, but nothing else really. So given whatever metrics you can pull from your server, again, you could create scripts that take actions to do, you know, all kinds of different things. The ability, for example, to bring up additional servers. Dave Brady had a beautiful flow that he showed at Synergy, in which he was monitoring activity levels, and then when things got too busy, he would actually bring up a whole new virtual machine, and then take that information, incorporate that into NetScaler, and add it to the load balancing set. And then when things come down again, he would undo all of that. So again, you know, your imagination is really the only limitation,
Once
right?
the XenServer fails, it automatically brings them to the vSphere.
You could do that. You could even do that, absolutely. I mean, Octoblu, as long as you can
If you can believe
take
it, you
the
can achieve
information
it.
and suck it in, you can do anything you wish. What's that, Jerry?
I said, if you can believe it, you can achieve it.
There you go, exactly.
When the master fails, it writes your resume for you?
Exactly. And again, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this talk, XenServer is really just an example of one of the things you can leverage. I mean, NetScaler, Zen Desktop, Zen App, you know, all of these things clearly are, if not already, will very soon be able to be incorporated into the automation of things. I think one of the key takeaways, at least that I got out of Synergy, was that Citrix recognizes that all of its product lines need to integrate much better. And a certain amount of interoperability among all of these different products is clearly in everyone's interest. And, you know, there are all these interdependencies already, right? So capitalize on that, right? And again, you know, for example, we have two data centers. We have a primary one and a secondary one. And for example, if I have another pool of XenServers in my secondary pool, one of the things I'm interested in doing, because I'm very heavily involved in, you know, some of our disaster recovery projects, is to say, oh, well, if there's a real problem here, I want to be able to live migrate, you know, all of my VMs and along with their storage, you know, over to the different node, right? And, you know, as yesterday, you know, Jared mentioned, you know, with this really cool new feature of being able to take VMs that have NVIDIA Grid backends and being able to live move them to a different location so that whoever's working on them has absolutely no loss in their productivity. The capability of doing that is to me, you know, just fantastic in terms of the interest of keeping the functionality running as much as possible. Yes, sure.
Do you feel that not knowing how Octoblu is going to be packaged, licensed, sold, once it's out of this tech preview type mode, is blocking adoption by some?
Well, any kind of a technology where you have no idea what ultimately your pricing model is going to be, certainly is an impediment of some sort. And I hope that it will be recognized that given the interest and the level of integration that people have put into it, the time and effort, that it's not going to become something that is so unaffordable that it's going to be a turnoff for a lot of either existing people who are working with it or down the road.
Citrix
of
never
course,
do this, so
I'm sorry,
Citrix never doing like something like that.
That's why some customers I've done it to, that's been their biggest hiccup, is like, I don't want to go far down the rabbit hole and then have to abandon, because
Right.
the packaging, pricing, whatever, ends up being like a workspace suite or a cloud only type thing.
Well, my hope would certainly be that maybe similar to some of the other products, that there would be perhaps a free versus a more comprehensive commercial grade type of tiering. But, that remains to be seen, right? But an excellent point, Jaron, because that's always, especially, as a university, or as a nonprofit institution, we're obviously always extremely conscious about costs. And nobody likes a big surprise, if all of a sudden a pricing model is introduced that was not anticipated. And again, going back to the reactive, proactive thing, that forces you into a reactive stance. And nobody likes that kind of.
Yeah, no companies like it when their product starts off as free, then they introduce software licensing or anything like that, do they?
We don't even want to go there. So again, into the future, I think there's some very, very interesting possibilities here. One of the things that's a little bit more complicated in this case is, there's a huge amount of data flow involved, and I really want to work on, because you've got these giant JSON files that you got to go through. I really want to try and work to better be able to optimize and parse these kinds of things. And it's no, not JSON, JSON, different JSON. So again, we want to concentrate on taking the information that is not critical to the internal processing of within the Octoblu environment, and do as much as possible of it, up externally on other servers, and then only provide or feed that information back in when absolutely necessary. And thank you.